I want to start out with a simple question today, but just because it's simple doesn't mean it's not high leverage. And, I really think it's one of those great things that really helps us get to that place. And so here's a question I have for us today. Do you really want God's best for your life? Notice that I use the word really, right? It's easy to say, yeah, I do. It's a whole different thing to actually be able to answer that question honestly. Do I really want God's best for my life? Sometimes I think we really, that question, when we run it through our dyslexic minds, it comes out this way, is I hope God gives me the best life that I want. You know what I mean? And those aren't the same thing. So there's this high leverage question is, do I really want what's best, God's best for my life? And the Apostle Paul, as he's writing to this church in Philippi, and we've been in the book of Philippians for the last 4 weeks, and we'll be there for a few more weeks. And, he has a longing for them to have the same longing that he has. He just says, the thing I want most is I want to know Christ. I want to know the surpassing power of God in Christ in my life, the power of the resurrection. He wanted God's best for his life, and he wanted that for this church in Philippi, which he, in many ways, had the least troubled relationship with, one that had truly been a blessing to him. This is what he really wanted for them. And because of that, he prayed this prayer that we've been using as the source of our series that we're in right now called Reset. Where he says, and this is what I pray for you. I pray that your love will keep on growing in knowledge and every kind of discernment, so that you may approve the things that are superior and may be found pure and blameless in the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that only comes through him, to God's glory and praise. And this is what he's praying for them over and over again. And we've been looking at this series called Reset, and we've been looking at aspect of our lives that we need to bring in alignment with God's mission if we're really going to experience his best. Now, I wonder, and here's, the stuff that, it's been a pretty intense week when we talked about changing our hearts, changing our minds, and then changing our what we do, our behavior, our life mission, if you will. Those are pretty heavy things. And sometimes we walk out here saying, there's no way I can do all of this at one time. And I get it. I think God gets it. That's why he has us on a pathway of learning. That's why he calls us disciples. We keep learning. And the way I look at it is, I remember when I was first learning to drive a boat, when I was a little kid, and we're going across this smaller lake, and my father said, well, turn around and look behind you, and it was like this, and I thought I was going straight the whole time, and he said, and my dad said, this is what you need to do. You need to find a point on the wayward shore and just go straight for it. And when you found that point on the wayward shore, when you start looking around back, now all of a sudden you're going straight. And what we've been doing is we've been holding up these things like our hearts, like our minds, like our hands, what we do with our lives. And today we're going to talk about our voices. We've been holding those things up as markers to help us move in the right direction all the time. I think in some ways they help us identify what it is that God's trying to do in us, and therefore we can cooperate with his activity rather than resisting it as we go forward. And today we're going to look at how we use our voices. And, for those of you who kind of need a memory perk to kind of pull out of the passage of scripture that we're memorizing, this prayer, I would have you use the word praise, to the glory and praise of the Father, as the stimulus to remind you that God's trying to change my voice. Now, biblically, there is absolutely no doubt that what comes out of our minds, out of our mouths, is connected to what's in our hearts. Or in another way, it's connected to who we are. I mean, Jesus said it several different times in the Gospels. He says, it's not what goes into a man that defiles him. It's what comes out is showing that he's already defiled inside, because it's out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. So we're in this scenario where we need, if we're going to do a reset with God, if we're going to take this invitation that he has for us to experience his best, we have to change what we say. Now, this is a little bit of a challenge. I did a little bit of research. This is not really my thing, but I did a little bit of research. On average, you and I speak 16,000 words a day. Now, if you're one of the lucky ones like me and you're getting 8 hours of sleep a night on average, that means you're speaking about 1,000 words every hour the 16 hours you're awake. So those are a lot of tripwires, aren't they? You have a lot of opportunity to really blow it, you know what I mean? And listen, words are powerful, aren't they? Words start wars, words end wars. Words launch marriages, will you marry me? Or I do. And words destroy marriages. Right? Words build up and inspire and encourage, and words wound and tear down, and etc. And words are there all the time. Some of you, if you just pause long enough, and some of you do this regularly, you can still hear words that were said to you, good and bad, from decades ago. Just the impact that they've had on you. And so, as God steps into our lives, and he's looking to use us as instruments of light in the world, and he's also trying to give us a light into our own souls, in the terms of what's coming out of our mouths is a reflection of how much work has been or needs to be done within inside of us. There is this challenge for us to look at our words. And I want to just... This could be a series in and of itself. It could take us all year long to talk about this. If you really want some places to go and make yourselves feel bad and get some just go read Proverbs over and over again, because there's plenty of warnings about the use of your words and words to caution you on how you do all of that. But I want to just point out 4 different areas that come out of our text. Now, we're going to be looking at the book of Philippians. And we've been, usually when we do a passage of scripture, like a study book in Philippians, we work exegetically. We just try to follow the flow of thought, understand it, and apply it to our lives. And there is great power in that. We did that with the Gospel of Luke for, 10 months. We just try to follow along with it. I've been doing something a little different here. We've been rooted in Philippians. We're trying to take what he says seriously, but at the same time, we're trying to see the underlying truths that are bubbling up through this pen that God is using in Paul's hands to speak to us. And one of those is the way that we use our words. The fact that if we're going to walk with God and experience God's best and be God's instrument of grace in the world, we need to change the way we use our words. There needs to be some impact. So I want to hold up 4 different things for us, and various lengths and that kind of stuff, different insights. I'm hoping that you'll just get some of this down and say, I just need to process this with God and keep working with it. It's a part of the way God's changing my mind, and God's changing my heart, God's changing what I do with my hands, what I'm doing with my opportunity, my time. It'll also change the way he's using your words and literally the words that are coming out of you, because God is at work in you, as Paul says in Philippians, to will and to work for his good pleasure, and he will complete his work in us. So God's at work in us, and it invites us to bring change. Now, so what should we be filling our mouths with? And here's the first thing that comes up to me, is that we need to be filling our mouths with the words of life. The words of life. Now, grab your Bibles if you haven't already. Turn to the book of Philippians. If you don't have a Bible with you, that's fine. There's one underneath the chair. You're going to find our text today on page 1040. 1040. And I'm so glad we're not in Philippians during tax season, right? When everybody's looking and thinking about filing their 1040, because that could be a negative thing. But we're on page 1040. And I want to use a couple of passages of scriptures here. So in verse 12 of chapter 1, as he's writing to the Philippian church, one of his first concerns is to share what he wants them to understand the effect that his house arrest, his imprisonment, awaiting trial before Caesar in Rome has had on the gospel. And he says in verse 12 of chapter 1, now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what's happened to me, in other words, he's now been arrested, has actually advanced the gospel. So it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to everyone else that my imprisonment is because I'm in Christ. And most of the brothers, in other words, others who would speak up and share the gospel, have gained confidence in the Lord from my imprisonment and dare even more to speak the word fearlessly. And you could follow on down through there but flipping over to verse 16 of chapter 2, as he's writing to them about being lights in the world, he uses this phrase. He says, but hold firm to the word of life. By holding firm to the word of life. And that's in chapter 2, verse 16. By holding firm to the word of life. So here's my first point. Our mouths, as they speak from our hearts, as they're guided by our minds, should be filled with words of life. I think one of the reasons why God gave us mouths in the first place is so that we could speak words of life. I mean, communication has a powerful effect, right? You just have to go back and look at the Tower of Babel experience and when they could all talk to one another, how ingenious. So God had to divide some things up and that kind of. But our words have great power, and God wants to use those words for life. Now, up front, the very first thing you need to understand, part of that is that the words that need to be coming from our mouths are the gospel. The gospel. And there's several different ways. What's interesting to me as a pastor, and it's one of these kind of challenges that goes on, there are many people who say they walk with Jesus, they have a love for Jesus, and yet even though they've been walking with the Lord for years, they really cannot articulate the gospel. They're in some ways experiencing the word of life, but they can't express the word of life. And there's a part of it, I think, that God is calling us to be people who can express the words of life as well as live them. Now, some of it can be just as simple as memorizing John 3:16. For God so loved the world, right, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. That is the gospel. You can unpack that. We did a video series and did some training a few years ago. All of this is still on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Hope Chapel. And you can go there, and we did some things about the gospel. And to unpack that just a little bit is we have what God's plan was. God's plan was to live in harmony with his creation and with those who were created in his image. But our problem is that all of us have sinned and we're no longer capable or equipped or just to be able to live in the presence of God without forgiveness. So we have this problem of sin which separates us from God. God had a remedy for that. That remedy is Jesus Christ and his substitutionary death on the cross. I know it's a big word, but it sticks there. And our response to that is faith. If we confess with our mouths Jesus is Lord and believe in our hearts that God raised him from the dead, we shall be saved. That's Romans 10:9. And so you look at it, it's God's plan, our problem, God's remedy, and our response. That's the gospel. Those are the words that we need to have available in our mouths to be able to share. Most of us are fearful to ever do that. Do you want God's best for your life? Go back and read this passage here. It says, In chapter 2, verse 12, he says, he talks about it as God is willing to and working in you so that you can be this light in the world. This is the privilege that God's given us. So we need to have words of life. We need to have the gospel in our mouths. But it's more but the words of life they're clearly the gospel, but they're also words that are intended to be words of edification, to build up. And so one of the questions I would ask myself, one of the questions that I would ask you is, how do you intentionally seek to speak encouragement into the lives of other people? Just think about it for a minute. So when as you think about your weekly objectives, as you sit down on Monday morning or Sunday night and you're working out all the things you want to get done that week with work goes on, do you have built into that, say, I want, as a part of my objective, to speak words of encouragement, spiritual encouragement into the lives of others, right? He wants us to have lives. He wants our mouths to be filled with words of life. And there are lots of verses that speak about the encouragement that we're supposed to be sharing. And if you're looking for a tangent place or a place to speak from the book of Philippians, just look at verse 17 of chapter 3, where it just says, just join in imitating me. And brothers and sisters, and pay careful attention to those who live according to the example you have in us. He said, man, he's seeking to encourage them, but he's saying you should be able to look out and see in others and receive from them direction, encouragement, edification, because they're walking the path and you should be able to follow them. We should be people who have the words of life. We have edification in their mouths. I like it a little bit better in Romans chapter 14, verse 9. He said, Romans 14, verse 19, where he says, let us pursue peace and that which builds one another up. And you need to have words of encouragement, words of edification in your mouth. And part of that means you need to have words of truth in your mouth. John 8:32 says, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And we need to have enough of this floating around in our heads and in our hearts that it can come out as a word that speaks life and speaks encouragement into the lives of others. And so that's as he's doing this reset in you, he is looking to use you as an instrument of his grace. And if you're resistant to that struggle is going to get hard because you're not going to be moving towards God's best. He wants to use you as a blessing in the lives of those who don't know Christ, and he wants to use you as a blessing in the lives of those who do know Christ. So that you can speak words of encouragement and edification and blessing into their lives. You can speak truth into their lives as you move forward. Does that make sense? Right? And probably all of us right now we can say, you know what? I have that type of friend in my life. And man, they really are a blessing. Man, we should want to be that kind of blessing to others as well, right? To be somebody who speaks encouragement and truth and life into other people. Here's the second thing that needs to be in our lives. And this is a theme I've been beating at Hope Chapel now for a number of months. And those need to be that we need to speak words of greeting. Words of greeting. So, right? And look at chapter 4, verse 21. Paul is kind of moving to the end of his letter to them. And he's kind of in his conclusion. And he uses this simple phrase. He says, greet every saint in Jesus Christ. Greet every saint in Jesus Christ. Now, let me just unpack this just a little bit, if not for your benefit, for mine. So, first of all, think about it this way. This is an era of the church where it depended upon the hospitality of believers in order for the cause of the gospel to go forward and for the church to be able to function. Think about it. When they traveled, You know, you can look at Paul's life, and in many of the cities we went into, once believers came to happen as they responded to the gospel, he stayed with them. The missionary enterprise, the spread of the gospel moving out from Jerusalem into Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth took place because people greeted others. They welcomed them into their home. That practice of hospitality. They didn't have church buildings like this. I mean, this is a wonderful tool to have, but folks, this is only a tool. This building is not the church. What we really do here on a Sunday morning is not church. What we do here on Sunday morning preps us to be the church in the world, right? And the only places they had to meet was each other's homes, you know, or they found themselves out by a riverbank until that could be established, kind of idea. And so this idea of greeting or welcoming, but I think we have come to so underappreciate the significance of this in the 21st century in church life. You know, it's interesting. A couple of weeks ago, I went to a Brazilian church to speak at their 23rd anniversary service. And so in the middle of the service, they stopped, and the pastor had a written list of all the visitors who were there. And one by one, he had them stand. So imagine if you would come here on a Sunday morning, and I had a list of all the visitors, and I had you stand one by one. Most of you are saying, I ain't ever going back there. You know, I remember when I was in seminary, the church I had, you know, we didn't want people to feel weird by standing up and saying that we'd love all of our visitors to stand up so we can recognize them, kind of thing. So we would just say, you know what, we had the visitors sit while all the people who were regular attenders stood in their honor. So we're all looking over the top of them at their mouth, and it just. It was a different time, right? That was 40 plus years ago. I mean, a long time ago. So, you know, we love anonymity. You know, we don't want to even give away. People don't even want to give us their contact information, right? Because they think they're starting robocalls from India or something, you know. I get all of that. But listen, think about what it was like in the first century. When you, especially if you were a Jewish Christian, a Jew, but even as a Gentile, if you stepped into faith, you lost everything. You lost your family. You lost your career. You know, you lost all that stuff. And if the believers weren't there to welcome you, you were out on your own. And I want to tell you, we may not have the same sense of alienation, but when somebody gives their life to Christ and they step out of the world and they step into the kingdom, they need citizens of the kingdom to welcome them. And we should have words of greeting on our mouths, right? And we need to be welcoming people into the body. I can do parts of that. I tell you, one of the things that makes me feel so guilty, so I'll meet somebody, you know, and we'll talk as they're leaving, or I'll talk to them in here, and 2 or 3 or 4 weeks later, I can't remember their name. Because the reason it bothers me so much is because it makes you think like, well, they're not really significant. Just the opposite is the truth. But the problem is that this finite mind has such a hard time, right? Remembering stuff. That's why it takes the body to do it. And we need to be speaking words of greeting. I could go on, but we need to keep moving. Here's the next one. And this comes out of chapter 4. And it backs up into verse, I believe it's verse 6. Let me just start with verse 4. It says, rejoice in the Lord always. I'll say it again. Rejoice. Let your graciousness be known to everyone. Words of life. Right? The Lord is near. Don't worry about anything. Right? Don't worry about anything, but in everything, through prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Now, I want to talk about prayer and petition, and I want to talk about thanksgiving, but I want to start with thanksgiving. Our mouths ought to be full of words of thankfulness and gratitude. They just should be. You know, Paul wrote the same thing to the church of Thessalonica, and he says, rejoice always, pray constantly, and give thanks in everything. Now, one of the things we don't like, But what that means is when we say we give thanks in everything, it means that in every circumstance there's something to give thanks for. Some of you have, are, or will walk through some very difficult circumstances. There's always something to give thanks for. And we need to have words of thankfulness and gratitude that are coming from our mouths that are expressed not only to God, but also to others as well. It's interesting. I did a little reading this week, and they said that we're going to talk a little bit about the power of thankfulness and line it up with some spiritual things here in just a moment. But one of the things that they took is that when thankfulness was actually expressed, not just thought, they've done all these studies, they take all of our tax money and do these grant studies, right? So, and on the power of thankfulness, and what they said, when it's actually either written down or verbally communicated to everybody else, the impact of thankfulness goes off the chart, besides just thinking it. If you don't express it through your hand or express it through your mouth, it just diminishes so much the impact that thankfulness can have on your life. This call, one of the things that stood out to me, we had this woman who attended our church for a long time. Now she's gone to be with the Lord. She got older. She had a lot of limited mobilities, a lot of other issues going on in her life. But she used to write words of encouragement and thank you notes to people, dozens a week. And you could just see the impact on her disposition of all of that. Just to express thankfulness, right? But as they have studied the power of thankfulness in people's lives, now this is psychologists speaking. They say one of the positive things it can do to you is shift your focus. It can shift your focus. And when we talk about, it is such a transforming experience to start seeing the glass half full rather than half empty. That's a shift in focus. Notice what here is doing. So you can give thanks in everything. When we give thanks, it shifts our perspective from the problems that are here to the Lord who is over all. And we get that shift of focus that God is with us in the midst of this. And so it has this tremendous impact in our lives. They talk about the fact that being thankful will promote actually a sense of well-being, a sense of self-worth, a stronger self-esteem. I think personally, as believers, as we express thankfulness, gratitude to God and to others for what God has blessed us with, that we actually come to appreciate the relationship that we have with God more and more and more. We come to actually understand and embrace the fact that we are the children of God. And that God's love has been poured on us as his children lavishly. And so there's this power of being thankful for us. They say it lessens anxiety, right? And it helps produce contentment and all those kinds of things. And so it's a marvelous word for us, and he challenges us. And listen, when you're in the circumstances, don't worry, right? Don't get overwhelmed by it at all. But one, pray. We'll talk about that in a minute. And secondly, be thankful. Look around and see all the things in your life that are good, that God has placed there in a very specific thing, for very specific reasons. I came across just a couple of quotes. One of these is anonymous, and the other one is I know who the author is, and I'll share that with you. But the one that's anonymous says, it's not that we need more things to be thankful for. It's just we just need to be more thankful. It's not that we need to have more, I could be thankful if I had more things in my life, right? Kind of idea. It's not that we need more things to be thankful for. It's just that we need to be more thankful. And there are many who believe that as we do that, more and more good things will come into our lives. Just honestly, you don't have to raise your hands on this, right? How many of you would prefer to be around somebody who has a positive outlook, motivated by thankfulness, or somebody who's a grump and a whiner? right? And you don't be elbowing the person next to you. But you know what I'm saying? And listen, if you're a more pleasant person, you're going to have more pleasant people in your life. Isn't that a good thing? Right? So, anyways, I love this quote by an old English preacher by the name of Charles Spurgeon. He said, when he's talking about thankfulness, he says, it's not an issue of how much we have, but it's much more about enjoying what we have that leads to happiness. It's not we look at it and say, well, I don't have enough to really be happy. It's actually enjoying what we have to be happy. And I will tell you, one of the things that strikes me every year, and I'm trying not to grow insensitive to it because of all the trips that I've made there, but you can travel to Rwanda, and you can go out into the bush areas where kids are living without running water. They don't have electricity. They have hardly, they struggle sometimes to have food to eat. And some of them don't even have access to education. But I will tell you, those kids are as happy as our own kids. Because they don't realize what, quote unquote, they don't have. They're just excited and thankful for what they do have. They have friends to play with and sticks to throw at one another and all that kind of things. It's amazing how you can turn an old tire, like an old bicycle tire, into a game. It's amazing stuff. But, this is just something that God has poured his pleasure. He just wants us to be thankful people. And the way for that thankfulness to reach its maximum impact on our lives is to express it with our words. And it only took man a couple thousand years to finally do the research to say when we express it, it has a much bigger impact. The last thing, and I'm running out of time here, is about prayer and petition. And let me get my zinger up front, right? and then I'll do some build off from it. I love it. So we just read just a moment ago. In chapter 4, verse 6, it says, don't worry about anything, but in everything, through prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And notice there's an invitation there for us to pray. And we need to have the words of prayer in our mouths and in our minds and our hearts far more often. I love the little quote from Corrie ten Boom. She was talking about prayer one time to a group, and she said, you have to evaluate where does prayer fit in your life. And one option, it's the spare tire. So when you hit the flat, then you go grab prayer and try to fix it. Or is it the steering wheel? The part that's guiding where you're going. And I want to tell you, I think the essence of the Lord's Prayer is that God really wants it to be our steering wheel. And in Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus lays out for us the Lord's Prayer. It's in chapter 6. And if you wanted to turn over there, I'm just going to make a couple of comments off of this related to prayer, and then I'm going to wrap up for today. Again, these are markers, right? These are things on the other shoreline that help us to go straight. That God's working in us, and that should guide us along a path that's changing our hearts, it's changing our minds, it's changing what we do with our hands, and it's changing our voices. And back when Jesus was teaching his disciples to pray, he said, pray like this. And the first thing he said is, our Father in heaven, your name be honored as holy. Now, right up front, those things, so first of all, we have a unique relationship with God because he's our Father. That's something to be thankful for. The idea of it, hallowed be his name, meaning be made holy, and your will being done as is on earth as it is, things need to change. It's a confession right up front to say, God, I need to step forward to you and change and allow you to work in my life. Give us this day our daily bread. It's an acknowledgement of the fact that we are dependent upon God. It's a healthy thing to have. Doesn't mean that you and I can be lazy or passive or anything else. That's not what it means. What it means is that we are dependent upon God. for not only our salvation, but also for our very lives. Give us this day. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. The need for confession, the fact that we aren't perfect and we need to move forward. And then that last phrase, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. We need God's guidance. And so prayer here is not supposed to be just a spare tire that we pull out when our lives turn into a train wreck, right? But they're supposed to be the steering wheel that guides us towards the Father, seeing the provision He makes for us that we can be thankful for, and confessing the fact that we still need for Him to change us from the inside out as we confess our sin to Him and seek to heal the relationships that are around us. And then we ask for His guidance as we go through those steps. And Paul says, your life is going to be a whole lot better as you're seeking to know Christ and the power of His resurrection if out of your mouths is prayer and making your requests made known to God. And so He invites us to change how we use our mouths. And, it's interesting. Most of us would probably say we struggle with having the kind of prayer life we should have. I think that's pretty fair assessment of most of us. Most of us say, well, I pray some, but I should pray more. I think most of us would be in that category. Hopefully you're not. Hopefully you are one of those prayer warriors that say, man, I pray all the time. I had a seminary professor who literally kept a card file on every single one of his students. And this guy, he could pray. He could pray. It was unbelievable. So, and that was just a ministry in some ways that God had given him, besides teaching church worship to a bunch of pastors who had no idea to really how to sing or play the piano or do anything else. So he had quite a challenge in front of him. I want to wrap up with just a couple of challenges. Just a couple of things for you to think of. First of all, if you've never confessed with your mouth and believed in your heart that God raised Christ from the dead to be your Savior, confess that today. Confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that the Lord Jesus was risen from the dead for your salvation. Believe that today. And confess it verbally to someone. To me. I'll be standing around the lobby drinking coffee in just a minute. Secondly, pick a goal out of these 4 things we've talked about today. Set some kind of a goal, whether it's related to words of life or whether it's related to greeting, words of greeting, or whether it's words of thankfulness. I'm looking around here and said, there's probably a lot of relationships that are represented in this room that would be really blessed if there were just more words of thankfulness that were expressed on a regular basis. Not to dig anything or any, that kind of. And then lastly, to pray. Set a goal related just to prayer. Pick one of those, set a goal, take some steps forward, let God work in it. Because this is the prayer that God has for you, what He's trying to do, which is He wants your love for Him and for each other, for your experience of His nature, which is a loving nature, to grow by having a growing knowledge and of every kind of discernment, so that you can approve, that you can recognize, want, pursue, and have the things that are superior, so that you can be pure and blameless. Virtually no separation in terms of your practice between you and God, that you can be pure and blameless in the day of Jesus Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness to God's glory and praise. Let our words be changed. God, thank you for your word today. We acknowledge to you today that it is you who is at work in us, working for your good pleasure, seeking to complete your work in us to be like Christ. And it's in His name that we pray. Amen.